Welcome to it. Broadcasting, or doing the show for that matter, from the Henley Business School today, and chatting to Jon Foster-Pedley, the Dean of the Henley Business School, about disruption in a digital age.
Hein Kaiser, the Media Marketing Show, on Mix 93.8.
Jon, good evening. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Hein. It's great to be here.
Jon, Moore's law dictates things change very rapidly. We see it speeding up even more so these days. The Internet of Things, disruptive behavior, technology, it has just completely penetrated our lives, and it has fundamentally changed the way we work, live, and consume the media.
I think that's exactly right, Hein. I try and simplify this into kind of everyday observations, and I've got young kids, and I see them on the iPads all the time, every evening on the iPads. And of course, we pull out our hair, what's left of it, saying, why are they doing this? But then they're being prepared for a very, very different world. You know, they're interacting with media. They're not consumers, but they're engagers and creators of content all the time. And for us, I remember when that became part of our life, that we were doing that, we felt super empowered. We could write things that people would read. For them, it's second nature. So what does a world like that mean, where kids are growing up engaging with each other, engaging with technology in a way we never believed in was possible? And what does that offer them? And what does it mean to us? If I take a simple example from a couple of nights ago, I was sitting there watching, and my boy was on his iPad, and he was playing one of these games, and he was playing with somebody in Baku and somebody in Dubai, and they were all on Skype together, all playing the same game. They were chatting as if they were in the same room. Now, what does that do to a person who was brought up thinking that your village is the limits of your parameters, or your town, or even your country? So what's emerging is a new way of thinking about the world is hardly imaginable to people who haven't been immersed in digital technology.
So do you think the role of, if you take it back a couple of years, the role of social media and the emergence of Facebook is really where it all began?
I remember when the internet first started coming out, and it was just so amazing. You could download content or send an email. Now, of course, the last thing we need is more emails. Our major preoccupation is how do you get rid of email, and how do you filter things? So digital media started like that, but the moment Facebook came along and we could actually communicate with friends, and there was a social element to it, I think that transformed so much of us. Now we can connect socially with people, and the friendships that you and I might have face to face are now possible abstractly and at a distance. But what happens then is, what happens to our real friendships? You know, what happens to you and I sitting here, nodding, listening, thinking about this stuff, having a drink together and talking, when we could do so much out there online? And my concern is how do we engage with strong real-life friendships at the same time while our identities are literally distributed around the world? So you, Hein, is now all over the world communicating with people, but the real Hein is in front of me talking. Okay, so how do we get that absolutely amazing experience kept sacred, as it were, while we're so far connecting in all these different personas we have? So to me, there's a really interesting question, which is, who is the real me and who is the real you in a digital world? Because it's so easy to produce all these fake personalities.
For a marketer, this makes life very, very complex in a certain sense, because you cannot really connect with a human being anymore.
Well, you can, and it's which bit of the human being are you connecting with? I mean, I suppose from a marketing point of view, and I remember speaking to postmodern marketers some years ago in France. Of course, the French are very good at all things postmodern and philosophical. They were saying that we are now separating our identities. You can actually create these avatars and online people, which become real people and real consumers. They're not you, but they actually consume in different ways. So you can go online, you can identify with different markets, buy different products, and it's not necessarily the same person that's sitting in front of me now. So what it means is that for the marketers, you've got the concept of segmentation and identification of who you consume with is incredibly more complicated. We exist in tribes now, little tribes. We have tribes and identities around a product. My son has got a huge identity around the fandom of Clash of Clans, for example. Now, he is, if I let him, spending a lot of my money buying jewels for Clash of Clans at the same time, and that's real money. And at the same time, he's on 4 or 5 different identities. You and I, we can go onto Facebook and LinkedIn. We're now building our online presence through all those things. We boost Facebook adverts. We buy stuff on LinkedIn. So what starts to happen with us is we're not only connecting with people, but we're consuming, and we're spending money into social media in different ways. If I want to buy a shirt now, I can go to LL Bean online and have it couriered over here in no time with a lifetime guarantee, which I couldn't do here. If I want to buy a ticket, I'll go onto Kayak, and I'll look at Kayak, and I'll find a ticket that's cheaper than any travel agent can find me, and I'll buy it with my credit card way before they can do it. Uber Eats, everything. So the way we consume has changed in many different ways. So when you're thinking as a Kayak executive, running this sort of online travel agent, you've got the world as your market. When you're marketing locally, you're running from a local business, you're trying to get a local presence, you're trying to work through the corporates with all your relationships through SAB and all the other companies you want to work with to become your clients. You've still got that face-to-face marketing. What happens in online marketing, you're not only disintermediated, but you're also depersonalized in a certain sense. And what's happening is your generic personality, who you are, is engaging around your generic needs and also your very specialized needs. So it means that the way we market changes. It's not so much face-to-face, but it's about creating identities that we can all resonate with. You want to go and use Amazon, perhaps, not because Amazon is a great in terms of a brand that you affiliate with, but it just produces amazing service for everybody. So you want to have a very easy interaction. So you're not particularly worried about the back office of Amazon or who Jeff Bezos is or who the company is. In fact, that's irrelevant to you now. Your consumption is defined by the quality of your experience and quality of the content. I think for marketers, that means you've got to shift your thinking quite radically away from the way marketing was taught to the way marketing was believed in previous years, because the parameters, the boundaries, the way you consume have changed so much.
So what is the implication for example, brand loyalty? Because if the consumer is only looking for a generic, quick and easy quality of service, is there still brand loyalty at the end of the day in maybe the next decade or two?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, we're all Amazon consumers. I guess I don't know anyone who isn't an Amazon consumer these days, really. But why do you stick with Amazon? And it has to be simply ease of use and the breadth of content you can get. So what Amazon's concern is now is reducing unit costs. It's actually engaging with you in quite a different way. Because while you are buying things easy from Amazon, what Amazon is enormously clever at doing is analyzing through big data your consumption patterns. With predictive intelligence kind of apps, with the way they're working using your data, they can now start to understand what it is you may be wanting 3 steps down the line. You're getting a bunch of suggestions based on your prior consumption patterns. You don't know how much of your consumption patterns from other sort of online kind of engagements you've had are being analyzed and produced by companies like Amazon, so that they know you personally in depth. So your personal engagement is very, very much deeper than it was before in some ways, but very, very much shallower than it ever was, because you are not as a persona really there. So your hidden consumption patterns are analyzed. So they understand you really deeply in terms of what you like and what you don't want, but they don't know Hein. They don't know you, so there's no sense of that person. And that's the dance we're playing with online consumption now. You've got this possibility to make really good specialized individual offers without touching a real person at all. To me, the dilemma now is what happens to that real person? Who's going to market to the real Hein or the real Jon, the things that I really want to touch and see? And that's why I think that the idea that paper will disappear or books will disappear or shops will disappear is ridiculous, because we all want experiences and interface and that real personality, that real touch. We can't live in an avatar world. In fact, if we did, it would be an absolute nightmare, because where would we love, where would we engage, where would we eat out together and have all those experiences? So the other side, I think, of the digital revolution is that the experience economy blossoms in parallel, because we're engaging with the digital economy so strongly that the real us is not really having as much of a presence as it could have. So we now create fantastic experiences through theatre or through every bit of online, every bit of personal interaction we do, so that you and I can have a sort of lived experience which is very much more vivid almost than the online experience.
In conversation with Jon Foster-Pedley, the Dean of the Henley Business School, back with the rest of the interview in a jiffy. Henley Business Media and Marketing Show, continuing the conversation with Jon Foster-Pedley. So all this interconnectedness, how does it influence education, in particular for an institution like Henley, postgraduate studies, one of the most highly rated in the world in terms of your MBA courses, but how does all this interconnectedness impact you?
Very interesting, isn't it? Because suddenly we all believed that all education would go online and that we would all have iPads and apps, and now we would learn. But it doesn't take much for an intelligent mind to deconstruct and sort of rubbish that idea. Because the fact is, there's some stuff we learn, like content, etc., that can be hugely augmented by having online methods. Why should I create massive content that Stanford or MIT or Harvard or London Business School can create just as well, if not better, because we're all specialized? And why should we waste our time creating the same content? So it's almost as if, why don't we get generic content of very high value available globally, which means that unit costs drop right down, so we can do online MOOCs, or we can do courses where the content is free and you just pay for the exams and getting the qualifications. So on that level, then we can massify education and, of course, drive the cost down. And through apps like Udemy and Coursera, anyone, I mean, if you want to do a music degree, if you want to learn to play the harmonica, if you want to learn to write songs, or be, a physicist and learn quantum physics, you can do all that on Coursera or Khan Academy or Udemy, actually. So it's pervasive and available. And that gives us something. It gives us a knowledge base. But real understanding of something, it requires two things. It requires application and error. Without error, you can't understand what it is that you're really learning, because it stays in this sort of perfect image in your mind. I know this thing perfectly. The moment you use it, it starts facing the real world, and that's where you learn its limitations. You learn how the theories are constructed, and you learn its utility and its usefulness. And so you can have stuff in your head, but now you've got to use it. And that's really important. So education now is learn stuff, use stuff. And after you've used stuff, you've got to actually understand what it was you did. Now, most of us, when we do something, are desperate to see that we did the right thing. So we look for confirming evidence of what we did. We look for stuff that tells us, yeah, what you did was right. But if you want to learn, you want to look for disconfirming evidence. The stuff that shows you you're right. It gives us a knowledge base. But real understanding of something, it requires two things. It requires application and error. Without error, you can't understand what it is that you're really learning, because it stays in this sort of perfect image in your mind. I know this thing perfectly. The moment you use it, it starts facing the real world, and that's where you learn its limitations. You learn how the theories are constructed, and you learn its utility and its usefulness. And so you can have stuff in your head, but now you've got to use it. And that's really important. So education now is learn stuff, use stuff. And after you've used stuff, you've got to actually understand what it was you did. Now, most of us, when we do something, are desperate to see that we did the right thing. So we look for confirming evidence of what we did. We look for stuff that tells us, yeah, what you did was right. But if you want to learn, you want to look for disconfirming evidence. The stuff that shows you you're wrong. Now, this is quite brave. It gives us a knowledge base. But real understanding of something, it requires two things. It requires application and error. Without error, you can't understand what it is that you're really learning, because it stays in this sort of perfect image in your mind. I know this thing perfectly. The moment you use it, it starts facing the real world, and that's where you learn its limitations. You learn how the theories are constructed, and you learn its utility and its usefulness. And so you can have stuff in your head, but now you've got to use it. And that's really important. So education now is learn stuff, use stuff. And after you've used stuff, you've got to actually understand what it was you did. Now, most of us, when we do something, are desperate to see that we did the right thing. So we look for confirming evidence of what we did. We look for stuff that tells us, yeah, what you did was right. But if you want to learn, you want to look for disconfirming evidence. The stuff that shows you you're wrong. Now, this is quite brave. Facing the real world, and that's where you learn its limitations. You learn how the theories are constructed, and you learn its utility and its usefulness. And so you can have stuff in your head, but now you've got to use it. And that's really important. So education now is learn stuff, use stuff. And after you've used stuff, you've got to actually understand what it was you did. Now, most of us, when we do something, are desperate to see that we did the right thing. So we look for confirming evidence of what we did. We look for stuff that tells us, yeah, what you did was right. But if you want to learn, you want to look for disconfirming evidence, the stuff that shows you you're wrong. Now, this is quite brave, but you also need a lot of disciplines of observation and reflection to do that. Not only must you see what happened, as to do that on paper or with just your own company. And the other thing is that when you've got a bunch of people talking about issues, in whose minds are the ideas? Because what I bet, if you've got 4 people around a dinner table talking, it's as if the mind is in the middle of the dinner table and all the ideas are fed into this new mind and it's generating its own thoughts. Who owns the new ideas that come out of that conversation? And actually it's an interaction, isn't it? And that's what a great class does. And that's what a great teacher does. A great teacher engages you, provokes you, puts you on edge slightly, makes you laugh, destabilizes you just enough so that you can actually re-look at your own assumptions. And in that re-looking at your own assumptions is where the great learning happens. And that's what a great business school does. Not only gives you good knowledge, but it challenges you, it encourages you to think differently. It does it with a sort of kind of provocative love. You know, something that keeps you slightly on edge, you kind of resent slightly, but you know it's coming from the right place, and that allows you to come up with new ideas. It also encourages you to put things into action straight away, because it's only in action that you re-enter the concrete world from the abstract world, and you can see whether your business ideas, whether your home ideas, whatever it is, are actually got any depth or validity at all. And only in that heat of failure and the struggle and trying to get things done that we all face every day do you really get the deep insights. The other thing about academic knowledge, which is quite important to understand, the other thing about academic knowledge that's quite important to understand is that professors don't own the knowledge. Now, I know your background, you've run airlines and done a myriad of things, so I'm imagining that in your head and your experience there's a wealth of understanding and insight about marketing, developing airlines, etc. You know, and that's something that's rich in you. You know, how do you actually really improve that? How do you challenge it? Now, the point is, that's something you've not only tried out and developed your own models, but over time you've developed a way of doing things that works. Now, I imagine if I were to ask you exactly how to explain all that works, it'd be quite a challenge. Some of it you could, but the rest of it might be quite intuitive and innate and sort of tacit. Is that right?
Correct.
Right. So how do you get that stuff out of you? You know stuff that could be very valuable to other people. Look, admittedly, it's your competitive advantage at the moment. You may not want to share it all, but nonetheless, in an academic world, you try and share that. All academics do is they come to people like you who have mastery in things, and they ask you questions. They ask you lots of questions, then they ask another 30 people like that. And from getting all the answers, they kind of analyze them using the various tools they do, and from that they create a framework or model which explains that Hein and these other 10 people have found out that if you do this, this and this, they get that result. And they create a theory. And a theory is just a series of causalities that propose that you get some solution. And all the academics do is they talk to experts like you and they kind of gather it all together and analyze it. Here's a model. They didn't make the model. You made the model. All the experts did, all the academics did, was bring it out in a way that is transferable, understandable from basic principles. But remember, you did the invention. So what good academics can do, they can approach people like you who've been inventive and creative and effective, and they can start to create theories about that. And the theory doesn't hold truth per se, but it is an explanation, and other people can say, okay, I think I know how Hein did it, and maybe I don't have to spend 5 years of experience, to get a hang of it. I can learn this in 1 year by fast-tracking all the mistakes that Hein made and catching them earlier than he did, by which time, of course, you will have moved on further, so it doesn't really matter. So a good business school uses digital learning, it uses face-to-face learning, it develops experience, it develops empathy, it develops an ethos of support and respect, all for the purpose of somebody trying out new things and building better practice. And the purpose of that is to build better organizations and a better world and a better society for all of us to live in. And coming back to the digital aspects of that, is what digital can offer us is many, many tools to fast-track knowledge share, information share, to understand what's going on in the world. Which means that when you really understand what's going on in China and UK and America, then you can start to engage with the world in a way that was totally impossible for people 20, 30, 50, 100 years ago.
So, John, with the Internet of Things, for example, as well, and just all the potential, in particular in education, for example, that you've mentioned, the stuff we've spoken about earlier, what would you say the next 10 years hold for us?
We're all trying to understand that, aren't we? So what's curious to me is, how do you forecast things like that? Because we can only know what we know now, and so how do you get your mind so in tune what's going on that you can start to construct probabilities about the future? And those probabilities have to include political probabilities and human probabilities, and the way human actions change things. But what we obviously do know is that just by thinking clearly and not having so many limitations in our head, you can actually quite logically analyze what's going on, what's possible in the world. If you follow Elon Musk's career, for example, he's developed some software, he then develops now rockets and electric cars. He's the third largest car manufacturer now in the States. I mean, that's an unbelievable story. He's inventing batteries. He's now talking about digging tunnels underneath San Francisco and LA to get people one side to the other in sort of half an hour instead of 4 hours through the traffic. Reusable rockets. I mean, I was listening to podcasts of him, and the interesting thing about him is that he doesn't seem to have any limitations with thinking. He said, oh yeah, here's a problem. He's assuming that people are not such great experts that they know all the answers. He says, let's think of the game from first principles, and says, well, okay, why don't we do this and do that and do that? It's quite possible to send a rocket up and reuse it, logically speaking. Why shouldn't a private person do it? It is actually possible. He says, okay, well, let's do it. So there's not much between him why we could and let's do it. It's not much sitting to inhibit him from doing that. He's willing to take those risks. So what you're going to see with the possibility of technology is that the clear thinkers will be able to construct technologies in ways that we just cannot understand. I mean, I drive around now in a car with satellites telling me where to go. I say, hey Siri, call Hein, and I'm talking to you in 2 minutes. I can say, and I can navigate, I can do so many things on this funny little black thing I'm holding in my hand. It was just inconceivable 30 years ago. So why shouldn't we have bionic eyes and implanted intelligence chips and this and that and the other? So the interface between the real world and our human world is going. Now you might know Pokemon Go. You know that game? It's a great game, Pokemon Go. All the kids going around, here's this monsters around the place. But that's the sort of augmented reality world now. So we've got the real world and augmented reality sitting on top of it. Where could we possibly go with augmented reality? In medicine, in science, in education. So what we are definitely going to see is that we will be able to walk into houses, and the houses will be set up according to our preferences and react to us. Temperature controls, machines will be talking to each other, production will be made between machines, and it will be far more efficient than we can conceive of. What we don't know is where the human being sits within that again. So what if you get rid of so many jobs because machines can do them better, and ignoring the sort of apocalyptic possibility of machines taking us over, like the Terminator world. Ignoring that, and let's assume we've got all the artificial intelligence that works, where do we sit and what do we do? And I think that is one of the most interesting things for us to ponder, because what qualifies for quality of life for us? So do we now engage in arts or communication, or manage ourselves, or manage our evolution of human beings in sort of IT, information-rich world where we actually changing our bodies and changing who we are? All these things are not only possible, will absolutely happen. So what qualifies as a decent life, and what qualifies as a decent planet? And how do we save animals and keep the oceans clear? And how do we live a world that we actually want to get into? And I think that with the expansion of technology in that way, we're going to confront those existential, ontologically kind of challenging issues at a much, much deeper level. And I personally feel that gives us the possibility to live much, much richer lives. It certainly gives us the possibility to eradicate poverty. It certainly gives us the possibility to control population growth in such a way that we can have a world that's manageable. Whether it can control the demons of our human nature, there's sort of Trumpian, kind of fascinations and drives we probably all have within us. Whether we can do that, I've no idea. So I suspect that what will happen is we will start to be thinking much deeper about what it means to be human, what it means to control our minds and desires, and what it means to create a better world. So while on the consumerist side, yes, we'll get prettier shoes that tell us many things and can communicate with machines around us all the time, the question of what is being human is going to come clearer and clearer to us. So I'm hoping that future for our children will be far richer as a result.
Thank you so much, Jon, for great insights. Certainly a visionary academic Jon is. Insight.